I'll mute myself too.
Hello and welcome to everyone on this webinar on Guaranteed Livable Income. My name is Mark Hathaway and I'm the Executive Director of the Jesuit Forum for Social Faith and Justice. We're a very small nonprofit working for a more just, sustainable, and spiritually fulfilling society based in Toronto, and we do mainly research, publications, and education, including this webinar today. So it's delightful to have you here today. Welcome. We will begin today's webinar with a land acknowledgement. And I'll invite people during this land acknowledgement, if you want to use the chat function to put in the territory from where you're situated today, that would be wonderful. And so let us begin in putting our minds and hearts together as we begin this webinar. And as we do this land acknowledgement, of course, we're also very mindful of the events of the last few weeks, the discoveries of the remains of children in Kamloops, and more recently, I think in Brandon as well, and very much aware of the need to work for right relationships with Indigenous peoples here on Turtle Island, and also right relationship with the land itself. So let us begin today by acknowledging the lands where each of us are situated as sacred living communities made up of trees and plants, the animals that fly, crawl, swim, and walk, even the fungi and the microorganisms, the soil, the water, the air, which together really make it possible for there to be life, and who together sustain and regenerate life, who give life generously to us all. I speak to you today from the unceded traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, and more recently, the lands of the Onondaga and the Mississaugas of the Credit River, a place which many of you will have heard called Toronto or Takaronto. And I invite each of you, as I say in the chat, you can write the traditional territory where you're situated, as well as in any of the treaties covering that territory. The territory where I'm situated is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, which is a covenant really between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples to care for the lands around the Great Lakes, to share the bounty, the gifts of the land in a way that's equitable and fair, taking no more than one should, giving to those who need, and ensuring the long-term sustainability of that land. That image of all eating from the same dish with one spoon, to do so peaceably and equitably and fairly. I think it's a very good image as well that touches very much on what we're talking about today with a guaranteed living income, finding ways to live more justly, more equitably, more fairly, not taking more than we need and sharing what is needed. Toronto or Takaronto continues to be the meeting place for Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island and beyond. Together, wherever we are, let us acknowledge our responsibilities as treaty peoples to respect the traditional laws and peoples of these lands and to work for just and caring relationships between and with all. So once again, welcome. I'm delighted to have to see so many people on this webinar. just as we're a large group and we're using Zoom meetings, so I would suggest that for participants, to actually make sure you're muted and turn off your video during the webinar, unless you're asking a question or you're intervening in some ways. And if you have questions, and there will be a chance where we will be taking questions from the audience, just put those in the chat function. And we'll be collating some of those, and there will be a moment in the webinar when we can, address those questions. So I'm just going to, I might just move my spotlight for a second here. Put this on gallery view for a second. Who I'd like to introduce, first off, right now, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists and respondents today. Our panelists are Dr. Evelyn Forget and Ms. Jessie Golem, and the respondents, Senator Kim Pate and Sister Elizabeth Davis. Unfortunately, the Honorable Leah Gazan is unable to join us today due to a conflict in her parliamentary schedule. So we do apologize for that, but she was unable to attend today. We are delighted at the same time to welcome our guest moderator, Jamie Swift. And Jamie has worked for many years with the Sisters of Providence in Kingston, Ontario, and took part in weekly vigils at Kingston City Hall for more than 20 years to protest the slashing of social assistance and the lack of social justice for Ontario's most vulnerable citizens. Jamie is the author of a dozen books, has produced radio documentaries for CBC Ideas, taught at Queen's University, and most recently has written a book with Elaine Power entitled The Case for Basic Income, Income Security Justice, published in May by Between the Lines Press. So Jamie really has a thorough background in this whole area, and he will be an activist moderator because he brings a lot of knowledge to this. So I welcome you today, Jamie, and thank you so much for agreeing to moderate during today's webinar. Jamie?
Hello, I can speak, but I don't know if I can be seen. So that may be a blessing in disguise.
Yes, we see you.
I can't see myself, but that's okay. So shall we start now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to thank the Jesuit Forum, Mark, and your colleagues, Mark, for organizing this get-together. If I can say that something that's occurring in two dimensions is actually a get-together. And it's about a topic that our panelists and a growing number of Canadians regard as vitally important. I decided to wear my Toledo Mud Hens hat today because without it, I look like Medusa, given the lack of hair cutting here in Kingston, Ontario, where I'm speaking from. This morning's Globe and Mail had a letter to the editor about basic income, supporting basic income. It was made reference to the Dauphin Mincome study that Professor Forget will talk about, at least in passing, and it was in reference to a column in the Report on Business that was in support of basic income. So those are, if you want to put it in post-Vatican II terminology, signs of the times. So the importance of CERB, I think, those of us who've been engaged in the basic income movement, if you will, made the quick determination that something like CERB, 18 months ago would have been seen to be quite impossible. So it's one of those, what you might call, who would have thought moments. Who would have thought that, so much support, public support to Canadians in need could be brought in almost with the snap of a finger. So here in Kingston, we just had a who would have thought moment when the statue of Sir John A. Macdonald was removed from its high pedestal and taken away. Who would have thought that 3 weeks ago that would have happened in a town like Kingston, where Macdonald was based politically, and it's often seen as his hometown. And who would have thought that shortly after the pandemic began, the Financial Times, the world's leading business newspaper, would pronounce that 40 years of market fundamentalism had to come to an end, and called for radical reforms, what it called radical reforms that included policies that had been what it called previously seen as eccentric, such as basic income and wealth taxes. So I think that we're at one of those who would have thought moments within the evolution of basic income and the politics of basic income, both here in Canada and in many other parts of the world. And I think that is something that I hope, can sort of underline or be a background to our discussions today. So that's about all I have to say, except to say that we're going to proceed in this webinar in 3 rounds. Each of our 2 main speakers will have 15 minutes to talk about 3 different subjects. Let's hope maybe we can have a back and forth between them. And our 2 speakers, to introduce them, are Jessie Golem, who's an artist and activist based in Hamilton, Ontario. For not only, she's a pianist and a photographer and a professional writer, but Jessie's contribution to the basic income movement in the period after the basic income pilot here in Ontario was canceled is a wonderful photo series called The Humans of Basic Income that amplifies the stories of basic income recipients in Ontario. And it's been published very widely and has been, I don't think you can overestimate the contribution that Jessie's photos have made to basic income advocacy in the past 2 or 3 years. Our other main speaker is Evelyn Forget, who I don't know if we call her this in our book, but I don't think I'm out of line by saying that Evelyn is the godmother of the basic income movement in Canada, along with Hugh Segal, who's the godfather, perhaps. Evelyn has been teaching at the University of Manitoba, professor of economics and community health sciences for a number of years, and her research examines the health and social implications of poverty and inequality. So I think perhaps one of our respondents, Elizabeth Davis, might have something to say about that. Evelyn's most recent book, the 2nd edition, Basic Income for Canadians from the COVID-19 Emergency to Financial Security for All. So I thought I'd just open it up, and the first issue that we want to talk about and address is what exactly is a guaranteed livable or basic income, and how might it work in practice, and why do we need it? So you want to start off maybe with Evelyn.
And I think I am unmuted. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm delighted to join you this afternoon from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg. And I think Jamie's absolutely right. I think we really are at a pivotal moment. I think the pandemic has opened our eyes to a lot of changes, and I think many of us are not ready to return to the world the way it was. And I hope basic income will be part of the new world we construct. What is basic income? People tend to use the phrase UBI to mean all kinds of different things, but I think in serious policy debate in Canada, when we talk about basic income, we generally mean a guaranteed livable income or a basic income guarantee. That's a promise. a guarantee that no one will ever have to live without the resources necessary to live a dignified life. People with no other source of income would receive the full benefit, but it can also act as a subsidy for low-income working people. If you have wage income, for example, your benefit would be reduced by some portion of those earnings so that it's available for everyone. It's available to everyone. I think that one of the key features of basic income is that it doesn't divide the population up into little boxes. It doesn't try to distinguish between students and people who are unemployed and people who are not in the labor force and workers, low-wage workers. It is available to everyone. When we think about how it might operate in practice, I think that the pandemic, if more than anything else, has demonstrated that we do have the capacity to offer a benefit that can be responsive to the needs we have. If nothing else, we managed to deliver in very short order benefits to Canadians to ensure that the economy kept ticking along, that society kept ticking along, and we managed to avoid some of the worst potential outcomes of the pandemic that appeared in other countries. So I think that we managed to do it during the pandemic. We can do it going forward. And that's how I see basic income operating. Why do we need it? I don't have to list all of the deficits of the existing social programs that we live with. I think everybody's aware that provincial income assistance, social assistance, welfare, whatever your province calls it, is inadequate in every province in this country. It pays too little. People who rely on provincial income assistance for support are often trapped in the program because they are reliant on other benefits that are tied to that program, things like extended health care, dental care, pharmacare. If you have a disability, if you have children, it becomes a very risky proposition to accept a job opportunity that comes along. And so people tend to be trapped. It tends to limit their participation in society in substantive ways. I think the other real limitation of provincial income assistance is that it's not designed as a standalone program. It's part of a vast web of different efforts by the governments, various levels of government, the provinces, the federal government, municipalities, to send cash transfers to individuals with low incomes. And every one of those programs has different points of entry, different application procedures, different eligibility requirements, different regulations, which means that we force people at the very worst moments of their lives to navigate complex bureaucracies. And it's not a surprise that people don't, in many cases, receive all the benefits to which they're entitled. If you're working, you'll know that the kinds of jobs that are available to young people entering the workforce today are very different from the opportunities that were available to their parents, to their grandparents. Even before the pandemic, 30% of us were working at precarious jobs, low-wage jobs with little security and volatile earnings. And yet all of the programs we have in place to support workers who lose their jobs are based on the kinds of jobs that used to exist. Employment insurance can work for people in standard jobs. It doesn't work well for people working precarious jobs. So basic income, to my mind, is essential. It's essential to replace the programs that have ceased to function, if they ever did function, to ensure that everybody can live a reasonable life. It's a simple matter of justice.
Okay, from that, the basic income as a simple matter of justice. I think anybody who's seen the photographs that Jessie Golem has taken, which we'll see a few of in the minutes to come, will get that point. So over to you, Jessie.
There we go. Hi. Really good to see you, and thanks so much for having me here. Yeah, I think Evelyn is like everything that she said is really true. I suppose I can sort of talk about my own experience because I was receiving a basic income. Back in 2018 in Ontario, there was the basic income pilot that was put forward by the Liberal government. And at that point in time, I had 4 jobs. I was very exhausted, and what Evelyn was referencing about work can be inadequate and not exactly supported, and that's sort of the problem was in the gig economy, and all my jobs were precarious, low income, contract work. The thought of saving up for retirement is not exactly a thought that I'm able to even conceive. Like, so it was a very stressful existence, and getting the basic income just one of the hugest stress reliefs that I'd ever experienced, having lived most of my adult life in poverty. And then being able to, because of basic income, I was able to drop down from 4 jobs and focus exclusively on my business and building my own business. And I was actually seeing my business grow because I had time. Covered, being just like the hugest relief in my life. And if the story had gone the way that I'd wanted it to, and I was able to stay on the basic income pilot and start my business, I wouldn't be here now, because I'm a full-time photographer running my business and living and making a decent living off of that. But then, the pilot got canceled by the Ford government, and I was hell hath no fury. Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, your bandwidth was just down for a minute.
Hello?
We can see you now, Jessie,
Oh,
and
no.
hear you.
I think we were temporarily experiencing some low bandwidth, but I think it's fine now, Jessie. I think we can see you. You seem to be fine. I wonder if perhaps we should move on and circle back around to that first question with Jessie, just because she seems to be having some problems with her bandwidth. So maybe we could, pass on to the second round and come back to the first. Hopefully her internet will come back soon.
Okay, so the second round, and I guess I can pitch this question to Evelyn. How can we afford a guaranteed basic livable income? Or one could say, how can we afford not to have it? But that would be displaying a certain bias on my part. So would it discourage people from working, undercut existing programs for people with disabilities? I think you already dealt with that one in your first remarks, Evelyn, but is basic livable income affordable here in Canada?
You're going to have to remind me of all those questions on the way through. Let me talk about the cost first. There have been a lot of costing exercises. What would it cost to roll out a basic income across the country to guarantee that everyone at least has a minimum standard? And the Parliamentary Budget Office that arm's length body of very conservative economists sitting in Ottawa who keep everybody honest, has estimated the costs of rolling out a program like the Ontario Basic Income Guarantee that Jessie talked about a minute ago, right across the country. And their most recent estimate put the annual cost, the upfront cost of delivering this program at an eye-watering $85 billion a year. But, and this is the really important thing, but they said we're already spending $85 billion a year and more on other programs designed to transfer cash to people who need it. Things like provincial income assistance, things like the GST credit, credits, deductions. So their argument was essentially that we can take money we're already spending and spend it smarter. So essentially we could guarantee everybody in this country a basic income guarantee with no new taxes, no increases to existing taxes, and most importantly, no cuts to other social programs like supports for people with disabilities. So yes, we can afford it.
Can I jump in with a question here, Evelyn?
Pardon me?
Can I
Yeah.
jump in with a question here?
Absolutely.
Canada is a pretty tricky place to bring in new social programs,
Yeah.
because generally social programs, many social programs, particularly social assistance, are the preserve of the provinces. And if herding cats is a bit of a cliche, I think it could still apply to getting a national basic livable income here in Canada. Sometimes people talk about, well, we did it with Medicare. Why couldn't we do it with basic income? Can you talk to that a bit?
Sure can. I noticed that there are people on this list from Newfoundland. Newfoundland's on the brink of bankruptcy. Manitoba's very close behind. Many provinces, in fact, virtually every province in this country is in financial difficulty. Going forward, there's going to have to be a decision about how to transfer money from the federal government to the provinces. Provinces need more money. The feds have the fiscal capacity to pay for programs. So I think in some ways, if the federal government were to offer to take over some of the responsibilities of the provinces, there would be a lot of hand-wringing and head shaking, particularly in a couple of provinces in this country. On the other hand, most of those provinces are not really in a position to turn down dollars. So, I mean, the feds have a very strong hand here, but if it's led by the federal government, it really does require cooperation on the part of the provinces. So collectively, we certainly have the capacity to offer the program. I don't want to suggest for a minute that provincial-federal relations are simple, or that it's easy to get these changes in place, but it's certainly feasible. But there's also a lot of support in particular provinces for the idea of the basic income. PEI is sort of the primary example where all parties have voted or support the idea of a basic income. There's quite a lot of support in some of the other provinces in the country. And so some people ask, well, what could a province go it alone? I mean, Ontario essentially tried with the basic income guarantee. I think that most provinces probably don't have the fiscal capacity. In fact, I know that most provinces don't have the fiscal capacity to offer a full basic income guarantee, but they can do a number of things with their existing programs to move towards a basic income guarantee, to take away some of the regulations and some of the bureaucracy associated with provincial income assistance, to offer portable housing benefits, for example. In Manitoba, we've had a program in place since 2014 called Rent Assist, and Manitoba is one of the poorest provinces in this country. And Rent Assist is, for all intents and purposes, a small basic income. It's available to both working people whose incomes fall below a specified cutoff and to people on income assistance. The money's based only on your income and the median price of housing. And once you get the money, you can spend it on whatever you like. Nobody requires you to produce rental receipts. If you choose to, live with 14 other people in a squat, you can do that. You can live in your van by the river, or you can rent an apartment. It's totally up to you, but it operates like a basic income. So provinces do have the capacity to move towards it as well.
So
But
I think,
yes, it is a challenge.
I think, Evelyn, we can move back to Jessie. I'll just toss in something that basic income advocates often toss in, that we already have a basic income for people like myself who've reached a certain age, and nobody questions old age security or public pensions. So Jessie, are you there?
Yeah. My apologies. The internet where I'm at can be unreliable at times, so I'm sorry. But it appears to be okay. Like I was just sort of saying that, the pilot got canceled prematurely. I was furious. I decided, out of my fury, I wanted everybody to know what happened. I wanted people to know who these people were and what this loss was going to mean and what was going to happen. And so then I just started doing this portrait series, and I started finding people and just asking them just a simple question: what did you use basic income for? And I had some cardboard and I had some markers, and I just started to take these photos of these people. And it was an interesting thing. Like the answers to that very simple question really subverted a lot of the myths, I think, that people have, or fears about basic income and about people in our society and what low income people will do with money if they're giving it. So I thought it was just a really powerful series, and like doing the series itself changed my life. And now it's been about 3 years since I started doing this whole project, and people are still talking about these portraits and sharing them, and I still get opportunities to speak with like amazing people such as Evelyn and Jamie and all of you here. So I'm really honored to be here, and glad that I was able to make this contribution to the basic income movement and tell these stories. And I'm wondering if this might be a good moment to share some of those stories.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Okay. And I can probably tell some of the stories about some of the photos depending on who they are. Okay, so this is actually a good friend of mine, Sarah. She works as an osteopathic doctor in Hamilton. And she was like, when she was going to school, she was working as a bartender to help pay for her schooling and pay for all of her bills. So she would be like, the bar that she was working at was not nice. Like she'd be up late at night working nonstop, like not home until like late in the middle of the night, having to call police on drunk people and all that stuff. And then up early in the morning and going to school and studying. I'm really pleased to say now that because of basic income, she was able to focus entirely on her schooling. She's completed her schooling, and she's now a full-time osteopathic doctor in Hamilton, and she's working and helping people. And it's really awesome to see that and see the impact that she's given. Maybe we could look at another photo. Tim, basic income helps me stay healthy with good food. I am ill. So Tim has a workplace injury and he's unable to work. He's a very interesting person. Whenever I see him, he's very, very talkative, and he always just want to tell stories. And I remember one time it was just after the cancellation of the basic income pilot. I saw him and he was super excited, and he was like, Jessie, I have to show you all this stuff. And he got some like toys from the dollar store, and I was like, okay, Tim, I don't know what you're talking about or what this is about. And then he said, I'm going to go see my family for the very first time in years because I can afford it with basic income. So all of his family lives way up north in Timmins. Well, he lives down in Hamilton. So he hasn't seen his family in years, and he doesn't have any family here. He's very much alone here and disabled. So him being able to go see his family, he was excited because he was able to afford it because of basic income, and then also afford to buy some toys for his niece and nephew for Christmas. It just seems small and simple, but it's like those huge impacts that just change a life for the better, right?
I think it was Tim who came up with the name for the Hamilton group that continues to advocate on behalf of the folks who were on the Ontario pilot. Somebody asked a question and Tim said, well, I'm living proof that this thing works. So the group in Hamilton is called Living Proof.
That's entirely true. I actually didn't realize that was Tim that came up with that. But yeah, that is the name of the group, the Living Proof Basic Income Advocates Group. And they during the pilot, what they were doing was sort of helping these people and teaching them how to tell their stories and how to advocate for basic income. So, and a lot of those people still advocate, and they're friends of mine now, and people that I will, barring a pandemic, I would see on a regular basis. Is there another? Michael Hampson on basic income since January 2018. It changed my life, gave me back my dignity and faith in my community. ODSP, which is Ontario Disability Support Program for those not in Ontario, chained me in poverty, causing high stress and poor nutritional opportunities. Basic income isn't. It isn't basic. It's many layered and healing for us recipients in our community. Stand with us. This photo is one of my, this photo is one of the most important photos to me in the series. I wanted to say the word favorite, but it's not, because favorite is not the right word. It's the most important to me. And Michael, he's wheelchair bound. And you see, and he used to be like a huge advocate for people with disabilities. So he would do like what you would call a crawl in. So like if at any sort of event or a rally or something, he would actually physically get off of his wheelchair and crawl to the front, the podium or the stage to make a statement about the accessibility and barrier with disabilities face on a regular basis. And when I took this picture, I asked him, why are you smiling? When I was doing this series, not many people in my portrait series are smiling because everybody's angry and they're pissed off at what happened. And Michael just sort of exuded this sort of quiet hope and optimism that things are going to be okay. And like you see in the picture too, his hair is nice and clean. He's clean shaven. He's wearing nice clothing, and he looks healthy and he looks happy. And one of the more devastating and troubling parts of the loss and the cancellation of the basic income pilot was the suddenness and abruptness of it, was that people had to go back into poverty. And the physical transformation that I saw of somebody getting themselves out of poverty only to have to return back into a life of poverty is devastating and extremely troubling. And I saw that with Michael. I also saw it with Tim. I saw that physical transformation. But with Michael, the last time I saw him, he was stressed. He wasn't happy. His hair was long and scraggly. His clothes were not clean and new. He did not look healthy and happy. He looked stressed. And I was really, really worried about him the last time I saw him. And he died in January 2020. And I and many of my friends are strongly of the opinion that if basic income hadn't been canceled and that stress of having to go back into poverty and everything that happened, that's why he died. And if that didn't happen, he would be here, and his death is completely preventable. And so it's also just a point of sadness and anger for me that Michael isn't here, because he'd be talking in this webinar now if he was.
Can we go back to Evelyn for a moment?
Yes.
Story of Michael got me thinking, Evelyn, about stress and health and the effects of chronic poverty on people's health. You're a health economist. You've studied this. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, my first serious introduction to basic income happened when I was working as a health economist at the Health Sciences Center in downtown Winnipeg. And it certainly doesn't take very long in that setting to recognize that we're using our emergency departments and our clinics and our operating theaters to deal with the consequences of poverty. I think that the effects of poverty and poor health are clear in so many different ways. During the pandemic, we watched how infectious diseases just rips through neighborhoods with overcrowded housing and too many people with low-wage jobs. You know, I can tell this story. I was at a food bank in Winnipeg a couple of years ago, and I was having lunch with a group of volunteers who were also clients at the center. And one woman began to tell a story, a sort of long and complicated story that got more and more confused in the telling. And she stopped herself and she laughed and she blamed her confusion on a change in her medication. And what happened next shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Everybody began comparing their experiences with pharmaceuticals, and they were reaching into their knapsacks and into their purses. And I soon realized that I was the only person at that table who didn't have a prescription for an antidepressant. We medicate poverty in this country. And, you know, it is a tragedy that we don't ensure that people have the resources they need to live healthy lives. We wait for crises to occur, and then we expect the healthcare system to deal with the consequences.
Jessie, what's your feeling about that story that Evelyn just told, and about the, you know, stress and just sheer impossibility of living on social assistance or disability in Ontario? Because I expect you when you started taking these photos, you learned something about the lives of the folks who were on the Ontario Basic Income pilot.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear Evelyn's story, like, you know, about everybody having these antidepressants. I've never heard it like that, but it's so true, and it's so difficult and stressful and just dehumanizing. Last year, I bumped into a friend, and she was also a basic income recipient, and her portrait is in my portrait series. And I saw her, and she was telling me about how her mother died, and her mother was on ODSP and she was on ODSP. So like the poverty is generational. So this is all that she's ever known. And her mother died without any money, without any life insurance, without any savings. And then what do you do when you die and you can't afford a funeral, or can't afford to humanely and dignifyingly dispose of a body? And so then that means that her mother went to the state, and then it's just a bureaucratic nightmare to try and handle all of that and then be able to in a dignified way grieve and mourn the loss of your loved one. And it just made me both like sad and angry. It is something that you wouldn't really even think about, of like just how dehumanizing poverty is, and how you aren't even allowed to do something as normal as grieve the loss of a loved one. So yeah, like I like, we medicate poverty, we push it aside, it's dehumanizing. Literally today in Toronto, all the people who were encampment in tents at Trinity Bellwoods Park were evicted by police in military outfits and gear. And you just kind of like, I think about it both from a human and moral standpoint, that this is horrendously evil and wrong. And I'm certain, you know, as I'm talking to Jesuits and Catholics like that you know the gospel messages against that. But then it's also even just from a practical and economic standpoint of like, why are we paying why are we paying for poverty, and why are we paying for this sort of dehumanization on an institutional level, when I would rather pay for people like Michael to still be here and alive and with us, and people to pursue their dreams and have happy, healthy, and dignified lives. I think that in a very practical sense just leads to a better economic output. And I'm not an economist like Evelyn is. In fact, I failed economics 101. But if I feel like if I can understand that, then it can't be that complicated for people to understand.
So I thought I'd jump in here with what we're calling round 3 here. I mean, from what we've heard so far, it would seem to me that basic income, basic livable income makes common sense, and that the lack of a guaranteed floor for everybody in one of the richest countries in the world represents the death of the sensible. What do you think, how do you think we can most effectively advocate for and work towards a guaranteed livable income here in Canada? I don't know who wants to pick up on that one.
I think we're very lucky here in Canada, especially. We're considered leaders in the basic income movement. Back in 2019, I was really lucky. I was able to take my portrait series. I exhibited them at the North American Basic Income Congress in New York City and at the Basic Income Earth Congress in India. And I remember India was interesting because I was one of 3 Canadians there. So everybody was from everywhere else. And I just thought, like, this is fantastic. But a lot of people from other countries, like there was a group of people from Australia that came to me and they said, we look to Canada because you guys are leaders in this movement. You have so many resources, you have so many networks. How can we build a basic income movement in Australia that is as big and awesome as Canada? And I was like, I don't know. But so like that being said, is that there's a lot of groups and resources, and I believe very strongly in working together in mutual cooperation. Like there's a Basic Income Canada network, there's provincial basic income groups, municipal groups. I sit on the Basic Income Hamilton group in my own city. There's also like groups like UBI Works, and then like so many resources like Evelyn Forget, like you meant, like she wrote a book. We've talked, like it's been mentioned. Jamie co-authored a book with Elaine Power. Senator Hugh Segal wrote a book about it too. I've read all these books. They're all really fantastic. I can't recommend them all highly enough, and it's cool to like talk to the authors. But like we have all these resources, we have all these groups, there's basic income marches, and we have these stories, and I think like continuing to share these stories and connect with these groups and continue to look for ways to get involved. I think there's just so many options, and people can, like, if you want to contact me and just say, how can I help? Like I will talk to you, and we can have phone calls and we can tell everything, and then I will connect you to the people that you want to be connected to. I love doing this. I do it all the time. Yeah.
So that reminds me that I was on one of those meetings at the North American meeting, this Congress this past weekend, and the Basic Income Canada Youth Network was there. And these people are all under 25. And the question asked in the chat was, are you having fun? And they all expressed extreme enthusiasm and said, yes, we are indeed having fun, which is important because some of us have been involved in this push for 8 or 9 years. The meetings sometimes look like a group of Q-tips to quite a few gray hair, white-haired folk. So that's an encouraging thing. Evelyn, where can you take us with this?
I think I agree with Jessie. I think that the route forward is through community organization. And I think we need to recognize that there are lots of different audiences out there, and we all have our strengths and we all have our ways of communicating. I think the stories and the pictures are tremendously important. And I think that all of these polls of Canadians and indicate that there's a huge majority of people who support the idea of a guaranteed livable income. We see it showing up in party platforms. And so I think all of those things are tremendously important. And then there are the other folks. I mean, the sort of the people who need to hear the statistics and hear the numbers, and who need me to stand there and talk about, what happened in Dauphin 40 years ago and how there was an 8.5% reduction in hospitalization. And Canada spends more than $72 billion a year on hospitals, and like to work it through that way. So, I mean, I think that there are lots of different mechanisms, but I think the point is to be relentless. I mean, we run into resistance. We will run into resistance from entrenched interests. There's no question that change is going to be difficult. And I think that what we need to do is to harness that enthusiasm that's coming from so many different sources. And I mean, I've been overwhelmed over the last couple of years, a number of different groups that are sort of coming on board to support the idea of basic income. People I never expected to see support basic income, like the Steelworkers Union, for example. I mean, I never expected to see a major labor union coming forward in support of basic income. And in fact, you know, these organizations are recognizing how important basic income is. So I agree.
I have a difficult question, or a question that might be tricky. When I worked for the Sisters of Providence and I was part of the Interfaith Social Assistance Reform Coalition here in Ontario, every time a provincial election would come along, we'd get out with big signs, like electoral signs like the candidate had, and we put them up and they said, "Let's vote for a poverty-free Ontario."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that changed a lot of minds, because I think one of the problems is that advocating on behalf of the least influential and the poorest people in any society is very difficult, or in rich societies, because even in spite of the shocking data, most people in Canada are not poor, and politics, for better or for worse, usually for worse, tends to be based on the idea or the feeling of self-interest. You know, how is this going to affect me? And I was wondering if either of you could speak to that, because I think as a sort of a tactical hurdle that the basic income movement has to get over is to appeal to a wide audience of middle class, working class Canadians who are not necessarily going to directly benefit from a basic income guarantee.
I think you're right. And I think we do need to recognize that we benefit, even if we don't necessarily collect the money. I mean, basic income is like health insurance in the sense that it's an insurance policy. And, you know, I don't think most of us look at Medicare in Canada and say, well, I'm being cheated because I never got my cardiac surgery this year. We just thank our lucky stars and say, okay, I didn't need to be hospitalized this year, but it's there if I need it. And I think that one of the things that the pandemic has done, and to a lesser extent the 2008 financial meltdown did, was to shake the confidence of a lot of those middle class folks, and to make a lot of people who thought that they would never, ever, ever be in a position where they needed government money recognize that it's pretty nice when it's there and something happens that you didn't anticipate. And I think that's one of the things that happened during the pandemic. I think we certainly did see a lot of pushback from some quarters, but we also saw a lot of people who never thought very much about basic income and the need for supports, recognizing how important the CERB was to allow them to meet their obligations and to meet and to allow their family to live reasonable lives during the CERB. So I'm hoping that this was an eye-opener, and I'm hoping that those lessons will stick. And I think that part of what we have to do as a community is to make people understand that. The other thing I think we need to do, and this is a much harder thing because it's asking us to think about cultural change in some really profound ways. I think we need to ask ourselves how much richer our society is if everybody has access to a basic income guarantee. I mean, we've listened to Jessie talk about how her life was transformed by a basic income that allowed her to pursue her dreams and to contribute in an artistic sense. And I think that if we look at our creative community, I mean, one of the things that a basic income does is to allow that to happen. But it's not only the arts community, it's also, I'm a good deal older than Jessie and a lot of my contemporaries and even people younger than me. I mean, one of the things that happens to 50-odd-year-old women is that many of them find themselves married to older spouses or having parents who need additional help. and they find themselves in their 50s stepping out of the workforce to provide that kind of support and that kind of help, that caregiving for grandchildren, for parents, for an older spouse who needs that additional care. And they're 10 or 15 years before they can realistically expect a pension, and there's nothing there for them. So I think one of the things we have to ask ourselves is how do we provide this kind of support, this kind of the kinds of labor that make society function, but that doesn't appear as part of the paid labor market. You know, the artistic work, the work you do, writing books, all of that important cultural contribution that doesn't pay very well. I mean, this is what a basic income helps create, and that's the kind of society I want to live in. And that's something we need to make people recognize, those kinds of the benefits to a basic income.
Yeah, those are profound insights. Thank you, Evelyn. Jessie, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, like, you know, when Evelyn was just even talking about, like, yeah, caring for dependents and stuff, like, it made me think of, like, you know, stay-at-home parents, which is like such a valuable and important job, is, you know, raising young people, and it's also an unpaid job. So having a basic income to help people to do that. And I actually saw a lot of people in my portrait series, a lot of focus was on being able to have better relationships with their children. Yeah, and I also sort of thought, like, you know, how do we persuade governments and everything? And it's hard because, like, I do kind of see some of like sometimes sometimes I encounter, like, you know, like the thought is, we'll do this to make sure that we get voted in the next election. Or we change this policy because it's that party's policy and we don't like that. And I hate, like, sort of the partisan sort of divide, because it sort of hampers any work getting done or anything happening, because then, you know, it's just another party comes in and just dismantles all of that, which was what we saw happen with the Ontario Basic Income pilot. But I'm also really encouraged that basic income is a very nonpartisan idea that is getting cross-partisan support. Even just this week, like, there's been a basic income bill that's been being tabled and debated in the House of Commons right now, that was put forward as a private member's bill by a Liberal MP named Julie Jarowitz. And MP Leah Gazan, who is unable to be here tonight, has said that she looks forward to working with her on the bill. So there's, like, cross-party support, this overwhelming support from the Green Party, and, like, yeah, and you can argue for basic income for so many different, like, political spectrums, like why it's good in a conservative sense and why it's good in a liberal sense, and that gives me hope that this can be something that can gain a little more of a permanent political groundswell, as long as the political will is there. And we're increasingly seeing that will be there, especially because of the pandemic, and what Evelyn was saying, you know, about the impact of CERB and CRB and being able to keep Canadians afloat. Is we all, like, millions of us lost our jobs overnight, and I've had my income severely affected by the pandemic, as I'm sure so many of us has. So seeing that, and even, like, in my own personal life, like, I've seen both of my parents who held jobs, middle class, very good paying, solid jobs for 30 years each, both get laid off from their jobs separately without any warning and without any reason. And so, like, these sorts of things and this sort of precarity can literally happen to everyone. And I hope, like, it's a sobering reality, but I hope people realize that and realize and have the compassion to understand that it can happen to anyone.
Okay, so on that note of optimism, I thought maybe we could go to our respondents now. Elizabeth Davis, Sister Elizabeth Davis, who's been a teacher and held leadership and administrative healthcare positions both in Canada and in the United States. And as was mentioned earlier, she's been appointed to the Royal Commission on Renewing and Strengthening Newfoundland and Labrador's place in Canada, and has insights and co-chairs the task force on healthcare, known as Healthcare Accord Newfoundland. So the comments that have been made about the social determinants of health and how governments at the provincial level can save a lot of money by reducing inequality, reducing poverty. There's a payoff there, a fiscal payoff. Senator Kim Pate, who's been in the Senate since 2016, has decades of experience advocating on behalf of Canada's most marginalized, victimized, and institutionalized people. Those are people who've been incarcerated. And I might add, a lot of those folks are, given the way the media treat crime, or those people are despised by many people, even though their stories remain unknown. So I thought I'd just toss it over to Elizabeth and Kim and just get your reactions to what Evelyn and Jessie have said so far. I don't know who's, maybe Elizabeth, are you there?
I am, yes. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me here to be part of this. Very much everything that was said by Evelyn and by Jessie, I totally agree with. So I hope I can add something more, if nothing else, but to say I agree. First of all, I live in a community that for its whole life has agreed with a basic annual guaranteed income. In religious communities, that's the way we operate. And it won't be surprising that we live longer than women generally in whatever continent we live. And I don't think it's an accident or even a matter of faith. It's a matter of being sensible about how we do those things. I want to start with a quote from a Sister of Mercy in Australia. And she's talking about the times in which we're living. She says, "And so we ask ourselves in this strangest of years, what is the new music? For what and whom and where do we play lament? For what and whom and where do we play glad song? For what and whom and where do we play lullaby? Where is the blessing? Where is the hope? What must we forget? What must we never forget? What must we remember? Where is the new music?" If we as a global people are not wise enough to use this terrible pandemic that has touched every country on earth, we will have wasted an awfully important crisis. And for all of us on this call who've been persistent about this movement towards a basic income for years and years and years and years, and have seen our hopes rise and fail and rise and fail, to know that we've just come through this, or hopefully are close to coming through this pandemic, it has to give us an impetus, I think, to not waste it, to really take the learnings from CERB, to really take the learnings from how quickly our country could mobilize when it had to take us to this new place. And I think both Jessie and Evelyn said we need a deep cultural change. This is not a financial change or even an economic change. This is a deep cultural change. It's a cultural change that says what matters first in society are families and people and communities. And that's the group that works together to create a society that respects every single person, includes every single person. We do that in lots of ways in Canada, but there are lots of ways we're failing to do it. And among the tragedies of the social welfare system that we have, it is so terribly stigmatizing. I remember when I was a teacher in my early years, going to a small community that had been the wealthiest community in Newfoundland and became the poorest community in Newfoundland overnight when its mine closed. And I remember the principal saying to me, "Sister Elizabeth, I hate to tell you, but 80% of your kids are welfare kids." Like that was the moment I knew I had to be an advocate for social change. I was going into a classroom. I didn't know one name in that classroom. I didn't know one face in that classroom. And I was told 80% of those students are less than. They're welfare kids. And it's, you know how you have those moments in your life that define where you're going to go from then on? That was one of those moments for me, that we were daring as a group of adults to stigmatize a group of young children and thereby probably shape so many of their lives in the wrongest of directions. We're, as Evelyn rightly pointed out, we're close to bankruptcy as a province in Newfoundland and Labrador. And yet the government of the day has set up this health accord, not healthcare accord. I'm going to correct that for you, Jamie. It was a health accord, Newfoundland and Labrador. And believe it or not, it's led by a physician, a nephrologist, and a nun. So that will tell you how strange Newfoundlanders think. But anyway, we are doing two things that are most unusual. Number one, we put in the same sentence social determinants of health and the health system. We have said that we need to intervene, to acknowledge and intervene in social determinants of health, and we need to rebalance the health system, and they're in the same sentence. The second thing we've said, we can only do that, not by consulting with people, but by engaging with people. So we are being criticized from, we thought we were going to be criticized from all kinds of corners for both of those things. What's been amazing to me is that how open people are to listening and how affirming they have been of the need to do exactly what we said. So under the social determinants of health piece, we are looking, one of the things we're looking at has to be poverty. And one of the elements of that is the universal basic income. And how do we make that happen in our province if we can't have it in the whole country at a time when it appears we're close to bankruptcy? It sounds like the strangest time to do this. And yet, and on this call, I know Marion Party is on this call. She's one of the leaders of the United Church in our community in this province who's been relentless about this. George Powell out of the Baptist community here, relentless about this. And we work with them, not so passionately, I don't think, as they work, but certainly hand in hand with them around this as well. Our Pope Francis has spoken about, he rarely speaks about something as specific as this, but he has spoken about the need for us globally to move to universal basic income. And he's saying the same things we're saying on the call here. He's saying doing it the way we've been doing it is stigmatizing to people. Doing it the way we've been doing it is trapping people in jobs they don't want, but they can't come out of because if they do, they lose certain benefits. Doing this is forcing people to choose between jobs and caring for people in their families. Doing this, not doing this, is forcing people to choose between jobs and supporting their community. And he says at the bottom of all of this is the dignity of persons. The economy has become the measure of the country, not the people, with the economy as support for the measure of the country. So to come back then to the work we're doing with the Health Accord, over and over again in the public engagement sessions, we have people say to us, the two of us, how can we afford this? And I keep saying poverty costs an awful lot much more than not having poverty. If we ever expect to find financial balance in our province, we have to get rid of poverty. It's the single biggest deterrent from our province being healthy. And all the research shows that. But we don't talk in that kind of language. And yet we must. If people, private companies are not saying, what I'm doing here is affecting the health of people. If governments are not saying, how we're not doing the economy properly affecting the health of people. And if we're not all saying, how come if we don't improve the health of people, we ever think we're going to improve the economy, sustainable economy of this place? If we're not asking these kinds of questions, as both Evelyn and Jessie are saying, we are not asking the right questions. Once we ask the right questions, we will find the right answers. And that's what CERB showed us, that in that moment of absolute pressure and fear and terror, we immediately found a good answer, not a perfect answer, but we found a good answer when pushed, because deep down, I do believe that the majority of us in this country want what's best for all of us.
Can I interrupt there, Sister Elizabeth, and turn it over to Senator Kim Pate, who has just been given a large menu of things from Newfoundland that she could address from her situation in Ottawa. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you very much for joining me. I'm joining you from the shores of the Kitchissippi on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, otherwise known to many on Turtle Island as Ottawa. And I apologize, I've been in legal committee where we're considering the new Supreme Court judge, Justice Jamal, and then I'm also awaiting a vote. So I apologize, I've been in and out, and I may have missed things. I'm very pleased to be able to join you. I was really pleased to hear Evelyn and Jessie, as always. I think their work is tremendous, and Sister Elizabeth, I think your contributions are clearly many, and the fact that Newfoundland, Labrador, PEI, Yukon are all indicating not just that they need, but that they want to do something even before the economic realities, I would say, were what you were describing. And those of you who know me know I came to this, the main reason I came to the Senate was I wanted to pursue guaranteed livable income, free post-secondary education, free health care, dental care, pharmacare. Really, it was about how do we breathe life into the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that became law while I was at law school and was incredibly exciting. But 40 years on, it's really frustrating that we haven't moved very far. And so, unless I cark it or quit before, that's the plan. That's why I'm here, and that's what I'm. And of course, some of you know that when I introduced the inquiry in the Senate last February, it was 3 years later than I planned to introduce it because people said I would sound like I had, wasn't right in my right mind to be planning to do that in the Senate. Even though people like Hugh Siegel had come before me, even though the Kroll report, which is now 50 years old, had recommended this, even though the Status of Women Commission had recommended it. Now we have the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Inquiry and the National Action Plan. And all of that to say, I don't need to tell all of you, but life's work of working with people who are criminalized, essentially because they're poor, because they're trying to navigate past trauma of abuse, particularly if they're residential school survivors, if they're folks who are struggling with all kinds of other trauma. And our jails are not full of wealthy people. And that, to me, was the bottom line, that, I was a working class kid who obviously has transitioned class on, on the basis of education and now my employment. But, I was struck when I started working in the prisons that I knew there was a whole lot of people doing really awful things who had a lot of money who never see jail. And so, not that I want to see more people in jail, quite the opposite, but, I'm surrounded now by the very folks who can make decisions, who resile from doing that. And, my frustration right now is we're about to head into an election where I'm hoping that every single candidate gets asked what their position is on these substantive equality issues, especially guaranteed livable income. But, if eradicating poverty is not on their agenda, then I hope nobody votes for them, because it's got to be, we have to clarify to everybody that, as you've all said, it's costing us money to keep people in poverty. It's costing us money to keep people unhealthy. We've seen during the pandemic, it's the poorest, the racialized, the people who are living with the greatest challenges and the intersections of those challenges who have been hit worst economically, health-wise, and will, you know, and yet we're relying on them for pieces. And I thought it would wake people up when, you know, I was reminding people that here on, you know, just down the road from where I'm sitting right now, there are people living in the shelters during this pandemic who now have been booted out of them because they were temporary shelters in university residences that are being taken over, who were there because they'd lost their apartments, because they couldn't pay the rent, because they were working 2 and 3 full-time jobs for minimum wage before the pandemic, and then they couldn't do that, so they've lost. I don't need to tell you guys all this. So, you know, all I can say is that you have my commitment to continue to do this, and whatever else you see that we could be doing to push others to wake up to this is, you know, I welcome those ideas. And any of you have, you know, I continue to put out Jessie's material, and we're trying to do social media. The young folks in our office even have me doing TikToks, for goodness sake. So, you know, like, and actually I shouldn't belittle that. The engagement of young people on these issues because of some of those messages is really important. I thought they were just about singing and dancing and dogs and things, and it's true, my dog TikToks are more popular than many of mine, but hey, I'm trying to get him to say guaranteed livable income. So, sorry, I shouldn't joke about that.
Dog
But anyway,
ventriloquism.
yeah.
I was just gonna say, I watch your TikToks all the time. I love them, and I tell everybody about them.
Right. Well, you can thank it. It's my daughter Madison and you know, Maggie who got me doing them, and now we're trying to engage more. So yeah, any ideas you have of how I can activate that more is great. So yeah, I'm really grateful for all the work you do. I think if there's a way that we can consolidate efforts, one of the challenges sometimes for me is, who do I call? And, you know, I usually call all of you, the usual suspects, and say, you know, this is what I'm hearing now. And it's frustrating, I know, from, you know, sometimes I'll say, okay, they're yet again saying, how do we pay for this? And I'm sure y'all want to like tell me to, well, you're all too kind to F off. And, you know, that's not, but, you know, I want you to know as well what they keep saying back. And right now we're dealing with so many components of where we're coming up against, I think, a very privileged bureaucracy that doesn't want to understand how to deal with this. And therefore, that's who's informing our ministers, our politicians. And so I do think it's a groundswell during, you know, if they want to have an election, then let's make these election issues.
Bring it on, in other words. Okay, Mark, are we going to have questions from our audience now?
Yes, and I thought I'd start with the easy one.
Oh, good.
So we have one easy one and 3 hard ones, so that people and not everyone needs to respond to all the questions. So this first one was more of a kind of a technical question, which is there a difference between a guaranteed basic income, a guaranteed livable income? I guess there's also universal basic income. So does the term make any difference, and is there a preferred term? So that's the simple one.
Can I kick that off saying that universality with respect to programs like Medicare or pharmacare is a great thing, and all social services, but I think people in the Canadian basic income movement have realized that it brings up the title of a book that Linda McQuaig wrote many, many years ago called The Wealthy Banker's Wife. Well, you don't want to give, we want to be able to slash away at the welfare state because, you know, these universal social programs are giving money to people who don't need it. So I think that thinking seems to me anyway to underline why people are calling it a basic livable income and referring to it as a floor that everybody gets who needs it when they need it. So anybody else want to jump in on that one? Sorry to jump in so fast.
I think the language is important, and I think depending on who and what groups you're talking to, they would use, yeah, either universal basic income or basic income or guaranteed livable income. And yeah, there's a lot of healthy debates within the basic income communities in terms of like what form or what does basic income look like. And so I know, like, for me personally, I just use the words basic income just because it's vague enough and encompasses all of these different forms of this idea. Where it's like, you know, like in the United States, there was a presidential candidate who campaigned on a universal basic income, saying, like, if I became president, I will give every single American $1,000 a month, no matter what. And that was his thing. But then there was some debate about, like, well, should low income people get more money and high income people get less money? Should it be universal? You know, and what does that look like? So yeah, I just personally, for me, just use the words basic income to sort of encompass all of that. And then from there, we discuss the finer details, which more experienced economists are able to better communicate than I.
Anybody else want to jump in on the lingo question?
Well, for me, it's always been really important. I don't want to give money to rich people. They have enough money and they actually don't invest it back in the economy. And so for me, it's always been important. And in dealing with women's groups and anti-poverty groups, it seemed to be really important to all of us for the past 20, 30 years to talk about the need for a guaranteed livable income, because a basic income that's inadequate is what social assistance is. And it's also judgmental and it's moralistic and all of those things. But I don't want demogrants. I don't want money going to rich people. Thank you. I want us to figure out how to get their money, that money back that they're hiding offshore and all of the, and in, you know, numbered accounts and all of that sort of thing. But I do want to get rid of our social assistance schemes, and I want it to be guaranteed livable. And during this pandemic, the fact that the government decided people needed at least $24,000 a year, I figure that's a benchmark. They've already said that's a minimum that people need. And so that's why for me, the language is important. And you know, I know I've gotten in trouble a few times by saying nobody credible is calling for money for rich people. But, you know, I think it's important to distinguish that if we're talking about money going to rich people, as Art Eggleton has said, you know, he was an accountant and he spent most of his life trying to help people with money hide their money. And so, yeah.
Okay, anybody else on that one, or do you want to move on to the next one, Mark?
Let's go to that. That was the softball one. So I thought I was just kind of warming people up with that one. So
Bring it on.
Here's the hard slide.
The next one, I think, and I'm just going to preface it a little bit. I mean, in the nature with the changing nature of work and even automation. And if we remember, you know, 40, 50 years ago, we kind of probably were hearing these predictions that we'd have this time when, you know, we'd have all this leisure time and you know, we'd only have to work 5 hours a week and et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, we have this kind of changing, the whole changing relationship to work and how work and what's actually happened, which seems very different than that. So how might a guaranteed living income help us to think about work in a different way, and perhaps even allow people to dedicate more time to things that really matter to creating a more caring and sustainable society, be that parenting, ecological care, growing food, volunteer work. I mean, you can kind of imagine, but how might a guaranteed living income change our whole relationship with work hopefully for the better?
Okay, anybody want to jump in on that one?
I'll give that one a shot. Not only did they promise me a 5-hour work week, they promised me a jetpack, and I'm still waiting for that too. But I just want to remind everybody, and everybody here knows this, that if you think about all of the great advances that were made in literature, in music, in scientific discoveries over the past 4 or 5 centuries, almost all of them were created by people with a basic income, right? If you think about the 18th century, the people who were making those contributions, in many cases, they were attached to the church. And for some people attached to the church, they had leisure time to engage in these activities. Many of them found patrons and they received a basic income. And it was the freedom to engage in these kinds of activities that created so much of the cultural wealth we take for granted in today. And I think that that's what basic income gives us an opportunity to do as well. It really does ask us to reimagine what it is we mean by work. I mean, work for pay is a very, very small part of what it is we do. If you look at the great length of human history, work for pay is a very small part of what it is human beings do. Human beings work, and they work in all kinds of ways because work is essential to what it is we do as human beings. But we need to recognize that so much of it doesn't fall into the marketplace. And I think that a guaranteed livable income, a basic income, makes it possible for people who want to engage in their real work, which may not generate a paycheck, to do that kind of work. And I think that that's one of the greatest benefits of this entire program. It's recognizing and acknowledging and validating the really important work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I think that if I can jump in here, there's a difference between work and labor. Labor is something you sell in the market. Work is something that, as Evelyn has just suggested, is much broader. And it seems to me that the labor market, as it's behaving now, it's a classic example of market failure. Markets fail because too many people are forced to sell their labor at too little cost. So I think that conception of a new way of looking at social life and drawing a distinction between work and labor is very, very important. But I think Evelyn put it in a much more articulate way than I just did. Anybody else?
I think the other shock value of doing it is that it reminds us that people are not defined by their work, that you don't have value because you do this kind of work, and I don't have value don't have value because I don't do that kind of work. And if we were to introduce, no matter how logical and rational we see the introduction of the guaranteed livable income, if it were introduced, it would be a certain shock value in the country. And I think that's part of what the shock value would do, is exactly as Evelyn was saying, say that work is a good, but you're not defined by where you work or how you work or the work that you do. And non-earners in the society, and I think Jessie made that point, what's the most valuable work done in our society? Raising children. What's the least valued work done in our society? Raising children. So we got it wrong, and the money became the indicator of the value, and that's been where it has gone totally off the rails then.
Okay, anybody else want to jump in on that? Or Mark, do you have another question to throw out here?
I have a few more, but I think actually I'm going to interject a short one that just kind of got posted recently, but I think it's an interesting one, and this probably fits here, is why is it that some people consider this whole idea of a universal, or better said, a guaranteed livable income somehow a conservative idea that maybe is either letting business off the hook for not paying sufficient wages, or maybe it's letting the government off the hook. But some people seem to kind of consider it to be against, a kind of more social transformation agenda. Is that really true? Is there any validity to that, or not?
Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Let me try that one if I can. I think it's bad logic on their part. American labor organizer Andy Stern talks about how a basic income will raise the wage rate. I think if you think about this logically, it's very clear that it doesn't let business off the hook. It's not going to drive down wages. If people have an alternative, they can turn down demeaning work, they can turn down poor working conditions, and it will put pressure on low-wage employers to improve the terms and conditions of work. That's just how markets work. So, I mean, that's certainly not true. I don't see how it lets firms off the hook. I think it challenges employers to do a better job. In terms of letting government off the hook, I don't think that anybody advocating for basic income in Canada today suggests that basic income is a substitute for all of the other social programs and services we need. Everybody recognizes that healthcare is important. Everybody recognizes that people with disabilities need additional supports. Everybody recognizes we need money into social housing. Everybody recognizes that these other things are part and parcel and a necessary part of living in a high-income country. There certainly have been people over the years who've advocated a much narrower vision of basic income, where you wipe everything else out and just offer people cash instead of services. But I don't think that's part of the conversation, and I've certainly not come across anybody advocating that within the basic income movement within Canada. So I think it's just I think it's just misguided, frankly.
And well, like even where we're actually seeing this happen in real time right now, I see several posts on social media and the internet of like stores closing down because none of their employees are willing to go to work because they don't pay enough. And the solution is simple. Like if a big mega corporation isn't going to pay their workers a living wage, then yeah, they're not going to work. And finally, they have a moment where they can actually decide and say, no, I'm not going to risk my life in a pandemic for subpar wages and horrible working conditions. And I have this option to not take that. So we're seeing that challenge happen right now in real time. So it's sort of proving itself.
Yeah, I think in the book that Elaine and I wrote, we refer to a country song of the 1970s by a man called Johnny Paycheck called "Take This Job and Shove It." So the song is all about somebody who has a bad job and has to, if you look at the lyric, summon up the guts to say to the boss, take this job and shove it, and describes or alludes to the fact that that's very, very hard to do in the current labor market.
I do think it's important, though, I think it's an important question because it is what keeps getting raised. And I think it's behind what the problems with the BC group that brought forward. I mean, they essentially said that, we should, and so did the government in saying we'll have childcare instead of income. People need childcare. Well, poor people, you guys know, poor people need money. So. Yeah,
well, I think the BC group, and I think that was a big setback for the basic income movement. The BC NDP, as a condition of support, Green support, agreed to study basic income. So who did the BC NDP appoint? People who were already opposed to basic income, one of whom had published articles attacking basic income. So that's a comment on, I don't want to be too harsh, but perhaps the political sclerosis of the social democratic left in Canada. Another question, Mark?
Yes, two more. This one has been partly dealt with, I think, by Evelyn, but I'll still put it out there. So how would a guaranteed livable income affect existing programs such as healthcare, particularly pharmacare? I'm thinking for people, I know we don't have universal pharmacare, but there is some kind of pharmacare often for low income families, for instance, disability benefits. And someone also asked, what effect would this have on temporary foreign labor? So those seem to be kind of related questions.
Yeah, anybody want to jump in at that one?
The temporary foreign worker program is the most exploitive program we have in this country. And it needs to be fundamentally changed, in my opinion. I think that I don't think we should be bringing workers into the country and asking them to work at jobs that Canadians won't do for the wages that are being offered, not providing them with the same kinds of labor supports or access to assert their rights as laborers, and not providing any kind of a route to citizenship if they want one. So I think that is something that does need to be rethought. That's just an argument for keeping wages low, frankly. As for the other things, the other supports, healthcare, pharmacare, disability supports, I think one of the biggest problems we have is that in many provinces, not all, but in many provinces, these tend to be tied to income replacement. And so the question gets asked, well, if you replace income assistance with a basic income, what's going to happen to all these other supports that people also need? Are they going to be thrown out into the market to pay for their own pharmaceuticals? And there's a simple solution to that. And it's been piloted in Manitoba and BC, not piloted, it's actually been in place for a number of years, where these programs are available based on the level of income, not the source of income. So if you're a low income working person, you also have access to these same programs. It's delinked from the income assistance program. So it actually is a very simple fix, and it's something that needs to happen anyway, in my opinion.
Anybody else on that one?
I do think we need to be careful that the universal livable income doesn't solve every social problem in the society. And we can't say, well, we did that, fine, now we can rest on our laurels. It is an absolutely necessary condition, I believe, but it's not by itself sufficient. And it's a much bigger thing, both in terms of the social programs, Mark, that you just named, but also in terms of how we as a society continue to support a market economy that is ruthless and exploitive. And so that's a much bigger issue. So let's not fall into that trap of saying we have a solution here. And once we find that, the world will become perfect. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a substantial gap, a substantial flaw in our society, but it's not the only one.
Yes, I think that the basic income movement has to continuously challenge the notion that we are setting up this piece of public policy as this silver bullet that's going to solve all the problems, because that caricature is out there and it's repeated incessantly by people who are simply opposed to the basic income and have shown no demonstrable support for the huge reforms that need to be made to Canada's welfare state, including housing. There's market failure right there. Pharmacare, again, market failure. So that's a challenge that we face, and we have to constantly go after that one. Anybody else on that one?
I agree. I mean, I agree with what people have said, but I think we also have to look at some of those policies. The number of people who have stayed on social assistance because they get pharmacare, but it's totally inadequate pharmacare. It's the cheapest medication. It's often stuff that's more experimental, that's less effective. So I think we also have to look at, how we beef up those services across the board. They've been so eviscerated over time that we really need to look at the intersections and, of course, the housing strategies and all the rest. So.
Okay, Mark, is there another question in the chat there for us?
Hey, this is the last one that I have, at least, from the audience, and I'm kind of summarizing another thing. Given that the guaranteed livable income might actually be less expensive, I mean, often I think, people try to reduce, we could never afford that. But, when you kind of get down to the analysis, it looks like actually this might be quite affordable. It might be more efficient. It might, have less bureaucracy. And there's even seems to be some growing political support, including the recent Liberal Convention. So it's not there in the question, but I think, like, what are some, Elizabeth talked about cultural change. Like, what are some of the deeper, I think, cultural obstacles that are keeping this from moving forward? This kind of feeling like, people getting money for nothing, or is it the whole social assistance bureaucracy that probably employs a lot of people? I don't know. Or is it the whole thing about, the undeserving and deserving poor? I mean, I don't know what it is, but given those kind of deeper obstacles, how might we really advance the agenda to try to overcome those obstacles and really advance the agenda? And what might be some of the more effective advocacy strategies?
Anybody want to jump in on that one? 25 words or less?
Well, if I knew what the effective advocacy strategies were, I'd be doing them. But I think it is about dehumanizing people and dehumanize the stigma and the dehumanizing of poor people. And I say that because there's no end of money to criminalize and imprison people in this country, particularly those who are poor, who are racialized. It's why we have 44% of the women in federal prisons are Indigenous. Almost all of them have disabling mental health issues that are rooted in past trauma. And so, you know, I think we have to keep challenging those ideas, because we spend, you know, if right now, in fact, one of my conservative colleagues has just raised 3 new bills to create longer, more punitive sentences, and people are going to pass it because they say, oh yeah, we want to put all the bad people away, quote unquote. You know, it's ridiculous. So that I think we need to be challenging where we put our money and what the results are. And any ideas people have of how we continue to do that? How, you know, I had hoped that this pandemic, people would feel kinder, want to take care of people, and we've for sure seen that. And I saw, you know, 49 of my colleagues sign on to this, and Yusuf Hassan, who's just been appointed, has indicated he's in sort of in support of a guaranteed income. So maybe he'll be another new senator who will join on. But I have yet to figure out how do we move those people? I don't know.
Anybody else on this one, on how to reach people in a broader public, the people who are neither on one side or another?
I've done everything I can. I've told all the stories that I can, and I've used the very, very, very limited resources I have as a starving poor artist, and it's made an impact. And I wonder and question myself every day, could I have done more? And can I do more?
You're doing everything fantastically, Jessie. Thank you.
I'm trying my best.
So you want to stop being a submerging artist and become an emerging artist, but you're already emerged. I think one of the things are in
I work on it. It's interesting because, like, you know, I can now confidently say that I am making a full-time wage fully on doing my work as a musician and a photographer and an artist. And I never thought in my lifetime I would ever say that. And I'm very proud that I can say that. And it has saved my life, but I do at the same time get angry that I've spent 25 years learning how to play the piano and mastering the language of music, and I will never make more than $30,000 a year doing something I spent 25 years training on.
Well, I think one of the that's a very good point. The Basic Income Canada Network and the Ontario Basic Income Network has a whole series of the case for basic income for work, the case for basic income for women, the case for basic income for artists. So the basic income movement has been trying to look at each of these sectors and develop a persuasive case for basic income. And I personally think that's a really, really important initiative on the part of a movement whose activity keeps expanding. Anybody else on this question of tactics and?
I think we shouldn't underestimate the role of the bureaucracies in maintaining existing systems. And I don't want to put that necessarily in a self-interested negative sense that people are protecting jobs, because I don't think it's that. I think that people honestly believe that they can somehow devise perfect programs. They can devise perfect programs. They're going to meet everybody's needs. And as long as we don't have these perfect programs where we can foresee and we can present a program that will make somebody's life better, we just need more money. All we need is more money, and we need to go further in the direction we're going. And I think that the notion that people can actually make pretty good decisions on their own if they have the resources to do it is a very, very hard sell to that group. And that is, I think, the thing that frustrates me the most. I mean, we know that doesn't work. If we look at the broader economy, we know central planning doesn't work. I mean, we know that in the real world, letting people make decisions, letting consumers and producers make decisions leads to better outcomes for the most part. Within a regulatory framework. And yet, when we look at our social programs, we have this incredible arrogance that somehow we can do better. We can do better. We can make better decisions for people, and we just need to do that. And all we need is more money to make perfect programs. And I find that so frustrating, and I'm not sure how to tackle that particular view of the world.
Anybody else want to respond to Evelyn's point, which is, I think, quite profound, and it's baked in institutional tendencies that that have to be confronted.
I can't answer what Evelyn said, and I hadn't even thought of that particular piece because I have been mystified in recent years with the Liberal Party and the NDP Party federally appearing very clearly to be supporting a universal basic income, having passed it at both their conventions, and twice it went nowhere. Like, I've been mystified by why that is so. It didn't seem to be making sense to me. So Evelyn's insight has been an important one for me just then. Thank you, Evelyn, for that. I do know in the work we're doing with the Health Accord, we will be endorsing it. So there will be one more province, Kim, joining PEI, going to the federal government and saying, if you don't want to do it nationally, use us as a test case. We're big enough and we're small enough. So maybe in this instance is where the small provinces have more of an advantage than the larger provinces to bring about some influence. So I can just assure you from our side, that's one of the things. Now, this has taken years and years and years and years of the persistence of small groups not letting this go, of staying passionate about it, finally finding those glimmers of light appearing, but being ready when they appeared. So that's another piece of this.
And maybe if people decide to hold all candidates meetings, which the Zoom world makes a little easier than it used to be, inviting those of, I know that, for instance, Senator Ravalia is on site in Newfoundland, and, he's a great support. But inviting some of us to join those all candidates meetings to challenge the ones who are running for members of parliament. I mean, we're, in theory, we don't, some people take the time off in between, but I think we can be called on to participate in those. And I certainly would be happy to participate in any and all that I absolutely can in terms of those sorts of meetings with and challenging members of parliament. Like, what are you doing about the people who, didn't get any support during this pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Kim, that the all candidates meeting, having organized those, you organize an all candidates meeting around something like, a green economy or a guaranteed basic income. The people who will show up at that are the people who are already in support of that, and the candidates know it. And so they'll either refuse to come, or if they're in support, they'll come and, bask in the applause. But the world of Zoom, and everybody, or many, many more people, can sit in and watch how the different candidates are responding to questions. I think that opens up a really good opportunity in any coming federal election. And it also speaks, I think, to the need for local basic income organizations to put the heat on their current sitting MPs. I think we can say in Kingston, the sitting MP here has been steadfastly in support, and that's because, I don't want to sound too indulge in too much hubris, but we've had a really active basic income group here in Kingston for 8 years now. And people listen when well-organized groups speak. So I think that's an important thing, that the next federal election offers opportunity.
And I think all of the group, I could stand corrected here, but I think all of the parties has said they support things like the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, number one is poverty. It also includes green economy. It includes, other equality issues. And so you might even not even call it guaranteed livable income. You want to have a town hall or an all candidates meeting about where they are on sustainable development goals, and then zing them with the anti-poverty. And this number one.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions, Mark, in the?
No, I think that's all the questions. I know we're coming up. We have about 10 minutes left. So if there were one or two very brief thoughts that people would like to share with us before we go. I still need about 3 or 4 minutes at the end of the webinar, but if anyone wants, if there's something any of the panelists is dying to say that they haven't gotten in yet, maybe this is your opportunity to give us your parting shot, so to speak.
Okay, don't all speak at once now.
Well, I do want to say I just want to thank you for inviting me here, and also to the other people on the webinar. I always appreciate, and so glad to see you all and work with you with all of this. And it's rewarding and exciting, and one of the joys of my life to be a part of this movement, and to and even though it feels like on some days it feels like so far away, and sometimes it feels like this could be a reality. But overall, more days than not, I have hope in this being a reality, and a reality I see within my lifetime. And it's thanks to this kind of work, and thanks to the people and the groundswell of support of all of us as citizens to build a better world.
Anybody else? Maybe I can offer this thought. I spoke at the beginning of the CERB and the toppling of the McDonald's statue here in Kingston as who would have thought that something like that could happen, 2 months, 3 weeks before it happened. Who would have thought? So I think that I don't think a comprehensive livable basic income in Canada is going to happen in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, but I think we can take heart from those kinds of shifts that happen at particular historical moments in society.
Yeah, and I think that certainly with the whole pandemic and the experience with CERB and many other things, I think we are in a different moment now. So let's take the moment and use it fruitfully. Just as we conclude, I want to first off briefly invite Victoria, Trevor, and Bertha to come on the screen, because I want to know that some of the behind the scenes folk. Bertha in particular, I want to mention, is Bertha Yetman was really the person who laid all the groundwork and did almost all the organization around this. So thank you so much, Bertha, for your work on this. And to my colleagues, Trevor and Victoria, thanks so much for your work today in the behind the scenes and collating questions and doing so many other things. It's been wonderful. I really want to thank you both for that. I also want to, and I'll ask Trevor now just to share his screen so you can put up, I want to recommend the books of both Jamie and Evelyn. So maybe we can just put those up quickly. And we're going to be sending out as well in our follow-up email. Senator Kim Pate had also shared some resources. We'll put those out in our follow-up email to all the participants in the webinar. But as you'll see, Jamie, together with Elaine Powers, written a wonderful book, just came out in May. So if you want to know more about the subject, this is one of 2 key resources, the case for basic income. So from Between the Lines Press, that's a great one. And as well, Evelyn also has a great book. So we'll put that one up as well. There it is, Basic Income for Canadians. So we have, we've had 2 really gifted authors with us today who have both written wonderful things on this. So if you want to know more, just pick those up. And I really encourage you to do that. And I'd really like to express my very deep gratitude to all the people involved in today, particularly our panelists, Evelyn and Jessie, and Jamie as guest moderator, who's brought so much to this, as well as our respondents, Kim and Elizabeth. You've done a wonderful job. You've shared so much knowledge with us, and we're really, really deeply grateful to you for all you've shared with us. And we're also very grateful to all the people who have joined us today And we hope that you'll keep following up in future events as well with the Jesuit Forum. We normally do webinars. I don't know, we've been doing them about 5 or 6 times a year at least, and we have a publication open space and other things you might want to check out. We've also recently published a dialogue guide called Listening to Indigenous Voices. So there's all kinds of things there you could explore, but on Guaranteed Livable Income, we've had a great webinar, and I thank all the people who have made this possible, and wish you all a great day and great future work pressuring your MPs and others on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank the Jesuit
Hi,
for
everyone.
organizing this.